Guten Tag. Hello to our participants for this webinar about the aftermath and analysis of the election results, European Parliament's elections in Germany. My name is Rebecca Harms. I'm the Vice Chair of the European Center for Press and Media Freedom. I first of all thank our staff, Jordan and Olga, to schedule this webinar. I welcome our esteemed panelists and participants and would like to say that this discussion, how this election results, this extremely high results, strong results for right-wing and also extreme right parties and politicians in parts of Germany, especially in eastern countries, federal states of Germany, can impact media freedom, media and journalists, is for us as ECPMF an extremely serious issue. We are based in Leipzig. The European Center for Press and Media Freedom would not exist probably without a long-lasting, for years lasting initiative coming from Leipzig and especially also the Media Foundation in Leipzig. And for me and the other members of the board, it is very important to understand what the results can mean if in the future and upcoming elections, results for the AfD and other non-democratic or EU skeptic party would be as successful as in the European elections. For our internal discussion, which we started in Leipzig yesterday, I think it can be of help to continue in a round like this we have invited for today. So to not increase or overdo expectations, I would really like to say that so for us it is an entry point into the discussion. We plan to extend this discussion in ECPMF, but we would also like to enter into a systematic dialogue with organizations of journalists and the press in Germany and in Europe, because I think it will be very necessary to learn together how we can work in this new situation and how we can also fulfill our own ambitions. So, for example, that free media are the cornerstone of democratic states, and without free media, liberal democracy is under threat. I'm happy to introduce to you our panelists, and I will start with Mr. Yann Rees. He's a researcher at the Institute for Interdisciplinary Research and on Conflict and Violence at the University of Bielefeld. And so I would like to ask you, so as we agreed on and discussed shortly before, what do you think, also based on your research, how can election results impact the role of the free press in Germany? Election results as we saw it for so extreme right parties in Germany. So I know there is always a distinction between extreme right and anti-democratic. So for Saxony, the analysis I learned about yesterday in Leipzig is that they really deal, from their point of view, with an extreme right party, which became the strongest in the recent European elections in Saxony. So what role for the free press can more influence, political influence, have if they come also to power? Which potential risks can develop after these recent successes of the right parties and anti-European parties in Germany? And so in Germany, we also have, like in other European countries, a long-lasting debate about what was called in Belgium cordon sanitaire. It's now called in Germany the Brandmauer. So what role does this controversial idea play when it comes to the free press in Germany? And very important also, and not always visible in our discussions, to what extent this anti-media sentiment is an issue also in other political contexts than the extreme right or right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Please, Mr.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction and also for the kind of conglomerate of very interesting questions. And I think I'll start answering these questions kind of in a chronological order. And first off, maybe to start off, I would totally agree that we have to categorize the AfD as a right-wing extremist, as a far-right party. So I would definitely agree with this analysis that you mentioned before. And coming back to like the role of the free press and kind of the connects to the latest election results, generally, I fear the situation will get worse when it comes to press freedom, because I think that like no other party, AfD represents anti-press sentiment. So to me, this voting turnout also is connected to anti-media, anti-press messages sent by AfD and a lot of its individual kind of representatives, if you will. So to me, the election results to this end kind of stress the fact that it's somewhat has become normalized to share anti-press sentiment, right? And this widespread kind of acceptance of anti-press attitudes definitely in and of itself has to be understood as a threat for the free press to me and journalism as a whole. So concrete threats that I think we already see, right, happening right now, like harassment, organized attacks, both via online and face-to-face contexts, I fear might increase, right? Because people kind of feel encouraged maybe by this recent far-right electoral support in Germany and also in other countries. And I think this is especially an issue because to me, AfD really has made this form of distrust and mistrust toward the media kind of politically usable, right? Because they add and add and add to existing and already pretty much widespread kind of mistrust and conspiracy beliefs among Germans by kind of systematically undermining the role that the free press, and especially a critical press, right? So a press that's kind of critical and reporting, for example, on the connections to Russia, as an example of what was happening recently. And I believe that the far right in general, but also the AfD in particular, have been, I dare to say, very successful in kind of implementing the free press and media as part of, right, what some call like an imagined elite, if you will, like in this populist kind of vertical conceptualization of us, the people, right? The people down here. And then you have on the kind of upper level, you have this corrupt elite, right? This elite that's trying to control everything and that's trying to manipulate us. And I think it was very successful, AfD and other political organizations of the far right, to kind of put the free press and the media among this kind of elite perspective, right? So that there's clearly kind of the free press is clearly made out to be somewhat of an enemy, I would say. And especially the right, quote unquote, mainstream media, and in Germany, especially public broadcasting, right? Like the öffentlich-rechtliche and the free press as part of this kind of elitist conspiratory group or whatever, right, of people. And I think this can also be seen by like the terminology. I brought up this term Lügenpresse already, I think, and it's also other terms that have systematically been used to kind of undermine the free press, and especially public broadcasting services in Germany, which is, for example, the term Systempresse or Staatspresse, to kind of devaluate and referring to kind of like this conspiracy belief that everything is controlled and people are kind of manipulated by this. And I think this is successful, and also it's politically appealing, if you will, right? Because it addresses and also it amplifies very much already existing distrust in media among the general public, but certainly among AfD sympathizers especially. Yeah, I think that would kind of be my answer to the first question that you asked. I don't know if I should go on or if you want to repeat this. I think you called it Brandmauer, cordon sanitaire. I can just go on, but please feel free to.
Please. No, please go on.
Right, and I certainly think that the idea of a cordon sanitaire, a Brandmauer, really plays a role when it comes to the free media, right? Because first off, I think, and I think you already said it, and I totally agree. I think anti-press sentiment, and related to this also, like the harassment and attacks on journalists, have to be understood first and foremost as a political problem, as an issue, right? Because I think it potentially, and we all know this, right? We've seen this in the past. It potentially limits kind of journalistic freedom, right? To report on things. It limits professional autonomy, if you will, right? So at the same time, I think it also, like this anti-press sentiment and especially direct forms of harassment and attacks on journalists also have to be kind of seen as political in nature in and of itself, because I think the ultimate goal is to silence journalists altogether, right? Especially critical journalists. And therefore, I think it's very important to kind of look at, or much rather investigate maybe, the political background of actors who are very prominent in promoting these anti-press sentiments, right? Because I think AfD kind of uses these ideas, for example, to kind of shape its own political profile, right? It has become part of AfD policy, if you will, or like policy ideas at least, to kind of like use these anti-media and anti-press terminology and terms. And then it is common, right, to directly and indirectly allude to anti-press like narratives, right? The famous Lügenpresse, the lying press narrative, which has become, to me, and in my eyes, not only common among like anti-media kind of milieus in our society, but also among far-right circles in general, right? Because I mean, in most far-right kind of rallies or demonstrations or whatever, you would probably run into this narrative, right? Because it has been established as so much as like a far-right kind of basic narrative, if you will. This is where I think I'll draw the connection to this Brandmauer, to this idea of like having a close kind of stop towards far-right groups. I think we have seen in the past, and this really I think is critical, that also other political actors have employed anti-press kind of narratives as well, right? It's not only AfD. We've seen this in the past, and I think this is a big issue because if democratic parties also kind of refer in a kind of derogatory, devaluating way, if you will, toward the free press, I think it kind of undermines the role that, Rebecca, I think you already shaped, right? Like this, some people called it watchdog, some people called it like the fourth estate, right? Especially critical journalism, to keep the powerful kind of in check and whatever, and like, right, this kind of, if you will, naive ideas maybe in today's journalism, but still important ideas And I think it's based to kind of fulfill this role that journalism has and that the media has. To me, in a working democracy, I think what we need is widespread acceptance, right, among the members of the countries, right? Because if there's no acceptance in both the political as well as the kind of public arena, if you will, then we run into issues. And maybe to kind of pinpoint what I actually mean by this, I think if far-righters don't accept the free press, that's bad enough, right? But if it kind of swaps over and it becomes kind of normal also in other political contexts, right? Be it conservative, left-wing, authoritarian, like the Wagenknecht Party, for example, it might seem like there is somewhat of a kind of alliance, right, against the free press. And if it becomes normal in other political contexts, I'm very, very concerned. And keep in mind, I think that like in various contexts, I would say the free press already is under a lot of pressure, right? Due to kind of internal factors, if you will, like this online first idea or other stuff that's kind of internally, like right within the system of journalism or media in and of itself. Financial issues, right? We've all heard of like the dying of newspapers, right? But also severe kind of external factors, if you will. And number one in this context for me is like this mistrust, disinformation, conspiracy theories related to the press, and also clearly kind of communicated and perpetuate hatred against journalism. So we know, for example, from representative survey that distrust and conspiracy beliefs among Germans in the context of media are very widespread, right? So it's already been spread and it's amplified by actors like the AfD. So it's not only an issue among like the far right fringes of political Germany or of the society as a whole, but it's definitely right more widespread than this, I would say. And maybe then I stop this monologue for one.
One short question, also based on my own experiences, because sometimes I have to admit, when I followed the reactions of AfD followers, yeah, to journalists, to publications, to the media as such, I felt reminded myself to situations in which I witnessed in totally different protest situations in Germany, for example, anti-nuclear protests, heavy sentiments, anti-media sentiments, because also these more leftish crowds, yeah, they mistrusted deeply every journalist who would not write what they wanted him to write and refused them often even access to their protests. So it's not only new, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wouldn't say this is a new phenomenon. I just think it's amplified, especially via this social media and online kind of perspective that we have now. But I certainly agree that it has been an issue for years, right?
So, it's also in the ongoing protests connected to Gaza and everything what develops, I think we should be carefully watching so how we deal with this. Yeah. But thanks for your first answers. I would now continue with Alexander Matschke. Alexander Matschke is working for the Deutsche Akademie. And there, as I learned today, he is responsible for advocacy, donor relations, and other fields, so lots of fields, and learning. So we propose to you to introduce your answers to the question what this really means if we always underline that democratic states can win against illiberal and anti-democratic or far-right forces only based on democratic means and based on democratically made laws. We always, as media freedom organizations, say that we stand, also with the media to defend democracy. But what is now really the role of media and journalists in this developing struggle, which develops in Germany, but which was a huge challenge for democracy in neighboring European states since quite a while. We would also like to hear your opinion about existing rules, laws, self-regulation in media in Germany, and whether they are designed to give also a certain protection for journalists in media in the context of a more political influence or possible more political influence of extreme right parties. And based on what Deutsche Welle and also the Academy is doing, we would like you to answer the question how international collaboration and partnership could help us to bolster media freedom and also to counteract the threats posed by the extreme far right and other illiberal anti-democratic forces. Please, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you for having me. Yeah, these are excellent questions. And yeah, first of all, it is evident that strong and stable democracy cannot exist without free and pluralistic media. And hence, there is no such thing as an illiberal democracy. Democracy in itself is liberal, has free and fair elections, protection of minorities, and free media. And yeah, we have a couple of examples, as you mentioned, from within and outside the EU of what happens when populists actually get elected into government. And here the evidence is clear. Despite populist ideology of being more democratic than liberal democracies, of being more directly democratic compared to inclusive electoral systems, they attack press freedom, they attack the press, as Yann Rees said, as elitist, and and thereby undermine the very foundations of democracy. Liberal debate, the possibility of every person to speak out, and so independent media and journalism, when working at their best, play a tremendously important role when it comes to pushing back against authoritarianism. They can provide accurate, trustworthy information that stand out in this ocean of disinformation and misleading claims that Yann Rees mentioned and that we experience, especially online. With harassment, especially of women again, and journalists, independent media can explain what's going on in society in simple words so everyone understands, can say something, they can sort out important aspects of the story and cut out the noise. They ask tough questions to those in power when working at their best, including to representatives of illiberal groups. And crucially, I would say they can insist on factfulness and work against polarization. And we know that populists thrive on polarization. So this is, maybe the most important role journalists and independent media can play. Unfortunately, media and journalism find themselves caught between two predatory forces. This is not only illiberal political groups, but also the current digital attention economy, in which few players with all their data-driven computing power get almost all the attention, and hence the advertising revenue that once funded journalism. And so it's maybe no surprise that populists rely heavily on social media to push their agenda and frame events according to their narratives. These two groups of actors currently form sort of an unholy alliance to finish off independent media. That's what we observe in many parts of the world, not only in Europe. there are certainly other parts of the world where independent media are less well protected. And that brings me to your second question. What do we have as rules, laws, self-regulation that might act as a lifeline to independent media? There's, of course, strong constitutional protection in Germany with Article 5 of Basic Law. There's many related decisions of the Constitutional Court strengthening media freedom and independence. Then there's international law, the European Convention of Human Rights, International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Important EU legislation has been adopted during the last legislative period, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will go into detail. Most importantly, we have seen the adoption of European Media Freedom Act, Digital Services Act, anti-SLAPP directive, for instance. So defense is strong on paper, but certainly governments in the illiberal spectrum, anti-constitutional spectrum, can influence media legislation. In Germany, in particular, on state level, I would like to highlight 3 points. Maybe there might be attempts to further weaken public service broadcasters and their independence. Single states could opt out of multi-state public service broadcasters in Germany and then create their own channel, shape it on an organizational level with persons close to the group, to the government. State governments can block increases in funding for public service broadcasters and therefore, in the long run, stifle their position in the current information ecosystem. Populist groups, of course, would also gain more influence in broadcasting councils when in government. And there are certainly more possibilities like amendments to state press laws, film funding, culture, civil society financing. So a lot to watch out for. And so this is state level. I guess on national level right now, I don't see anti-constitutional parties having a clear option to become part of government, but this of course can change, as we also heard in the first part. And you asked about self-regulation as well. So the German Press Council, for instance, gets financed in part by the federal government. So this could be scrapped by populists. But then again, when it comes to multimedia, to online services, self-regulation pretty much failed, I would say. So luckily, there's the Digital Services Act now with clear provisions for very large online platforms who now have to have in place an effective risk management, for example. And solutions on international level, international cooperation is important and becomes more and more important because, after all, we have planetary information ecosystem. Societies around the globe face similar challenges: disinformation, ownership concentration, lack of safety for media workers, again, especially women. And around the globe, we observe a decline in freedom of expression, media freedom indicators for many years. We have observed this trend now. Maybe 3 examples. The average freedom of expression indicator of Bertelsmann Transformation Index is down 11 percentage points since 2006. Global internet freedom has been declining for 13 years in a row. According to Freedom House, freedom of expression remains the worst affected component of democracy, measured by VDEM Democracy Report. So on an international level, international NGOs are important to address the challenges. They can, in cases of violations of international media freedom standards by incoming governments, they can act as early warning systems. They can provide networks to defend human rights, raise awareness, provide legal assistance. There is also a community of media development organizations like DW Akademie, usually funded by state donors, part of official development aid, but also funded by private philanthropy, with approaches to foster fact-checking, strengthen media outlets economically, with media literacy initiatives, or strengthening safety of journalists, including digital safety. Yeah, to close, I'm talking much, but I would like to draw your attention also to the ongoing discussions on the UN Pact for the Future with the amended Global Digital Compact, which is to be adopted by the General Assembly in September. And it is crucial that both the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact include strong language in support of independent public interest media. So if you happen to know anyone who has a say in these negotiations, yeah, raise your voice. And maybe I leave it here. It's pretty clear if we go to UN level, the global development agenda, that freedom of expression and media freedom are indispensable preconditions for human development. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexander. I smiled a bit when you spoke about this massive use the anti-democratic parties and movements are making of all possibilities in the global village, the World Wide Web. Because I remember the days when we spoke about better regulation and rules for this global village, and remember the massive first shitstorm in my political career, because I was in favor of regulation while pirates were successfully campaigning all over Europe against any regulation. And it's from my point of view, it would be interesting also to reflect in this context of internet regulation own mistakes in organizations or movements which campaigned against regulation. So we are late with this, but I think still it could matter to find better agreements on how to regulate. Yeah. But let's continue with Philippe Meistermann. Philippe Meistermann is the head of the Brussels office of the German Association of Newspaper and Digital Publishers. And BDZV, to say it in German, I looked for the right wording in English. So I think you for sure closely followed everything around the European Media Freedom Act. And this is really aiming as so a regulation to protect the independence of media. And we want to know your perspective so on these current European rules, and whether we have already sufficient safeguards for media freedom. We would also like to hear from you what strategies digital publishers and news organizations should adopt to safeguard their independence and integrity in this changing political landscape in Germany, but also elsewhere. And we would ask you to provide us with some insights into the role of the Bundesverband of your association in supporting media organizations which are facing threats related to these political shifts. Please, Mr. Meistermann.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm happy to provide the view more from the media companies side, the Publishers Association side. So I would start with our view on the European Media Freedom Act and what it does bring and whether it's sufficient to safeguard media freedom, I'd say in our view, the European Media Freedom Act brings some positive elements and some elements that are less positive. The positive elements are, I think, quite clear to everybody. It's the prohibition of state and government interference in editorial independence. It's the strengthening of the protection of sources with prohibitions on the use of spyware. So these kind of things that really relate to how governments or political influence can interfere in the independence of editorial work within, you know, media companies. So that's definitely a positive element. And I mean, we need to be hopeful that these new rules will also bring some positive effects. But I think the major shortcoming of the EMFA is, if you look at what the EMFA brings, I think from the view of media companies, publishers, it's more, it tries to more to fix symptoms than to really solve the underlying issues that are affecting the media sector. I think the major issue for independent media and media companies today is really the economic situation, which is extremely bad, and kind of introducing you know, rules that regulate internal structuring of media companies, or that maybe try to make it more difficult for media companies to consolidate, are probably, you know, might help to reduce some symptoms of this problematic situation, but they will not solve the situation in general. And that's maybe the major complaint that we have towards the EMFA, is that it will not really help to redress the situation. And as long as we don't create the right framework conditions for media companies to thrive and to be economically successful again, we will have to fight with these issues longer. And there, I think the EMFA will unfortunately not really bring any positive developments on this. On the second questions, on the strategies that digital publishers and media organizations should adopt, I think unfortunately, you know, the integrity and independence of media companies really heavily depends on the political and economic environment again. So I think that unfortunately media companies cannot do a lot to prevent a real degradation of the political situation. And unfortunately, you mentioned it earlier, I think there's always been a distrust or unsatisfaction of politics and governments with the media. It's natural. You know, the power doesn't like to be kept in check by journalism, by media, and so this distrust is a natural relation. So the most important thing for us is really the safeguards, which prevent governments from interfering there. And it was mentioned before as well. I think in Germany we have very strong safeguards, constitutional safeguards, including Article 5, which make it more difficult for political power to really interfere with the editorial integrity, independence of media companies. And hopefully, as I said earlier, maybe the EMFA can help as well. We need to see, but maybe this is a point where the EMFA can actually raise the protection standards. I think not necessarily for Germany, but if you look across Europe, maybe it can help on that point. So what can media companies do? I think what our association does is something very important. It's forging a kind of solidarity between publishers, because we represent the publishing industry as a whole, and represent all of the publishers in their joint interests, and fighting for their economic interests and political interests is important in that context, is that we defend their interests towards politicians and we make the voice of the publishers heard as a whole. So I think the role of our association is quite important as an expression of solidarity between publishers. And secondly, I think we need to mention the German Press Council. So self-regulation definitely plays an important role. And I think in Germany, we can be quite happy that we have a very strong self-regulatory body with the German Press Council, which of course all publishers in Germany and our members participate in, and which is an institution which intention it is to strengthen the independence of the independent media vis-a-vis the government in particular. And on the third question, I think it's quite a difficult question. So what do we as an association do to support media organizations that face threats? I think I gave one element already before. The element of solidarity, I think, is very important. We're bringing the publishers together, and we're also a forum for publishers to discuss the issues. So, for example, recently the blockades of some publishing houses in Germany was a topic that was discussed within our associations, and there, you know, we provide a platform for exchange on these topics, and we also can help to bring these topics more to the public, to give a voice to the publishers, also towards politics, but also towards the media itself, because we can bring these issues, to disclose these issues, bring them to the public. I think a free press is necessarily also an economically healthy press. So this is what we are fighting for as an association, and what we are trying to achieve contributes to solving the underlying issue and giving the publishing industry more resilience. But as I said earlier, I mean, if really a dire situation would come, I don't know how much we can do. I mean, and we have seen the situation arise in many countries in Europe, and we can only hope that the protections that were mentioned, that we have at state level, at national level, at international level, at EU level, and these new standards of protection that we have, that they will function properly. But there is no guarantee. So I think the best thing we can do is really sensibilize all Democrats in our countries on the importance of the free press and on the importance of having a healthy framework conditions in our societies, including doing everything we can to have a healthy economic situation for the media.
Thanks, Mr. Meistermann. And I think there might be some questions which you answered now, or some of your answers which would be so contradicted or answered in a different way. For example, Alexander mentioned the negative impact of the attention economy. You say, so economic interest is clear, and only so a successful economy in your media is the guarantee for independence or quality media. So there is, from my point of view, a bit a conflict. Or am I wrong, Alexander?
I mean, if I can answer just shortly, and then Alexander can, of course, jump in. I think that there's no contradiction. I mean, because solving the economic difficulties doesn't mean, following current trends that are harmful. And I think that all publishers and media has recognized in the last 10, 15 years how harmful the platforms and the large platforms have been in general to media business, because of advertising revenues, but also because of taking traffic away directly from media companies, which is now spending, I mean, the public is spending more time on the platform now than reading newspapers. So I think it's very clear to us that this is a big problem that we need to solve. I think when I say we need to solve the economic situation, it means that I think if you look at how, for example, in the context of the EMFA, we've been discussing media capture and how governments can, you know, get their hands on some media companies, or people close to governments can buy, oligarchs can buy media companies and then exert some influence in the media. I think this is possible only because these media companies are in a very bad economic situation. Oligarchs would not be able to buy up entire media companies if these media companies were very healthy, economically speaking, and an interesting investment. Also, we would have more diversity, because it would be interesting for investors to invest into the media and create new media companies for people that you know, want to bring new views also to the public. So I think the economic situation really plays the major role in the current difficult situation.
Yes,
Alexander?
I agree. One economically stable, viable, strong media outlets are the foundation of an healthy information ecosystem. And yeah, right now there are several challenges that impede this. The structure of the digital market, but of course also in some member states, yeah, media capture right away, and also media concentration. So I would say a healthy pluralist information ecosystem is one way to strive for and to build meaningful coalitions for.
So about the rules Germany has to keep media safe and to have a kind of better perspective compared to other countries. So on these rules, we have one question from one participant, Oliver Money-Curie, as I see it here. Do you want to ask this question, Oliver? No. Please, Olga or Jordan, give the floor to Oliver.
Hello. Am I in?
Yes, you are in. We hear you.
Okay. Yeah, but my apologies. I didn't realize I could join. I thought I could just write it. Yes. So I was at a conference 2 or 3 weeks ago, speaking to Christian or Jakob, I think, from TATS, who was explaining about this law where media regulators, in their efforts to fight disinformation, can intervene and remove content where they deem that the journalistic process has not been followed. So very clearly, they're not looking at the content, but the process to create that content, i.e., is it journalistic? And if it's not proved to be journalistic, then it can be removed. And I'm just looking at an article here involving the internet portal KenFM, which I understand you will be familiar with, but it's a fairly right-wing conspiratorial portal where they received warnings from the regulators about some of the content they put up. This is generally presented as a fairly, at the moment, as a law that is used very, very cautiously, very, very delicately, and therefore probably doesn't really do much to fight disinformation. And my question is, should it remain in place, therefore? Because you have the law on the books, and at the moment, because of Germans, checks and balances and in Germany and the way it works, it represents very little risk. However, when we're talking about the far right, get in power and get the opportunity to nominate their own regulators, it creates a tool that could be easily abused, or maybe not. I mean, I'm asking the question, you're the experts on this. So should it be reviewed? That's the sort of tool that I think, to prepare for the time when the AfD or others might get more influence. What are the laws that need to be reformed to ensure that they can't be abused and that editorial independence and media pluralism is maintained? Thank you.
So from my point of view, I would like to say that I do not see that Germany was able so far to really fight disinformation. And I see it very similar in other EU states. But whether we would have the right rules to do it or not, that's the question as I understand it. And who can answer this? Who wants to answer? Yann? Philippe?
I can say something. I can't say anything about the specific law that you're mentioning, Oliver. I'm not really aware of it, and I would have to look into it. But I think more generally, this is, of course, something that we need to be very careful about in general with media regulation or any law that can interfere with the freedom of speech or press freedom in general. This is something that we have been warning about also in the context of the EMFA or in the context of the DSA, is that we really need to look at these laws carefully so that they cannot be in the future abused. I see that, unfortunately, I think there's more currently a political desire to act quickly on certain things that are also seen as a threat, like disinformation, than to really think about what will be the long-term, or what can be the long-term risks of such interaction. And it doesn't mean that disinformation is not a threat, but I think on the other side, we need to look very carefully on the side effects that such laws can have on the freedom of expression or press freedom.
I can maybe add on the point of on this aspect of oversight, which to me sounds interesting as well, and something also worth looking at after state elections in Germany, for instance. I understand that private broadcasting oversight boards are organized on state level and financed by license fees. So it's somewhere to look who gets appointed to these boards after elections.
Yeah. Yann, you want to enter here?
I don't think I have anything to add because I've no real clue about the kind of law-wise perspective, to be honest. But maybe one short sentence at least. I think this is one of the kind of invisible dangers, if you will, like the institutionalization of far-right parties that I think your question kind of goes into, Oliver, if I understood you correctly. Like the idea that if it becomes institutionalized, what we see now is like, I don't know, like the election results on the map, we see the eastern parts is blue, but like the long-term effects and kind of this is part of this institutionalization and normalization process that I was referring to before, and it's also happening right now, and the kind of consequences on this kind of law level I can't really say too much about, but I think what Alexander and Philippe said was pretty much good.
I have another question, I think. No, it was again Oliver. He's satisfied with the answers he received. So that's a good result. If there is anybody else among our participants with a question, please so unmute yourself. I think it's feasible, or sent us a message in the chat. No questions. So my question regarding so disinformation and how we react is also actually related to the election results, because I find it striking that parties in Germany, but also in neighboring European countries, even in France, for example, it's a very good example, supported since quite a while financially from Russia, and targeted with organized disinformation since more than a decade, since much more than a decade, show these extreme good results for pro-Putin, anti-European and anti-illiberal democracy parties. So this will, from my point of view, pose a question to our ability to react to disinformation, which sometimes also works based on so-called media like Russia Today or Raptly. And so I know the serious criticism by media organizations against the disruption of Raptly recently, so only after the full-scale invasion in Ukraine. But I'm still missing proposals how to deal with these kind of disinformation attacks in a proper and accepted by media organizations way. So it's, from my point of view, one of the issues we have to discuss. Philippe?
I'm happy to jump in again. I think we've always been very critical of anti-disinformation initiatives. Again, not because we want to minimize the importance of this question, but I think the approach that has been chosen, especially at European level in the last years, is, in my view, a wrong one. We've decided to look more at the content itself than to look at the way in which it is being spread, and look really how these platforms and social media really works. And I think looking at the content itself and trying to find out what's good and what's bad, that's really the fundamental trap. It's Pandora's box that when you open, there is no way around censorship, really. And it's a trap that if we especially want to offer another system than our autocratic enemies, we should not fall into, because otherwise we would just become like them. So I think we really need to preserve freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and press freedom. And the way in which we can then counter disinformation is really to look more into the business models and the inner working of these platforms and how they spread information. And there we can really strongly regulate. We can regulate the artificial amplification of pieces of content. We can regulate the algorithms. We can regulate what is allowed and what is not allowed on these platforms from a technical point of view, from application amplification point of view. We can regulate the use of bots and these kind of things. Those are really solutions which, in my view, have not really been put into place. We've rather going into debates, how can we distinguish real press from wrong press, good media from bad media, quality from not quality, which I think is the wrong way.
So certainly the other panelists would agree to this.
Yes, very much. And I agree, look at the digital information ecosystem, look at exactly which economic interests drive the spread of disinformation. And I would say yeah, with current EU legislation, we at least can see what will happen if it is a remedy towards this challenge. And yeah, so I would say let's see what the Digital Services Act brings, and if it's not effective, amend it right away. Another important aspect of the fight against disinformation is certainly media literacy, someone that has come up more and more in recent years for good reasons. And so to maybe mitigate the spread again, because after all, it's human beings who receive pieces of disinformation, who spread it as well with digital technology. And yeah, the more critical-minded people are, the better in this regard.
Yann?
So yeah, thank you. I think these are brilliant points. I also want to add that this is not only an issue that we face in media, right? I think it's a societal kind of issue we see in other contexts as well. I mean, the question is, how do we reach people who are unable or unwilling most of the time to engage in like factual debates and discourse anymore, right? So who do not believe in objective facts, who receive their information from social media or the internet rather than like credible sources. So I think the point Alexander made about media literacy, I think is really important. I think it should start very early in the educational context. And we should understand this not only as a media problem, but as a societal problem, because it's also, we see this, I think also in the election results. It's kind of reflecting the kind of disparity, or like the way that people disengage from factual discourse. So I think it should be red alarm, not only in the context of media, but in the context of education, obviously politics, social work, right? I mean, it's a societal issue. We should see and understand it as a societal issue, and maybe put more emphasis how to kind of politically really implement this. I honestly have no clue, because I also agree that it's a very edgy, kind of difficult situation. We do not want censorship, obviously, and I also agree that we should look at the mechanism behind kind of amplifying misinformation on platforms. I mean, honestly, as a like Twitter user, I'm kind of I don't know if we can do this against like someone like Elon Musk, and I personally have no data on this, but my personal experience is like I get bombarded with misinformation, and I think these kind of algorithms still are somewhat of a black box in most cases, and I honestly have no clue how to kind of deal with this. But I totally agree that censorship should not be an option.
Okay, then so let me, so from my personal view, say that the idea of media literacy, I know this since the beginning of private radio and television in Germany, because when this happened, everybody was discussing in the 90s about the need of better media literacy and getting prepared for so diversity in the media landscape, etc. Since this famous book, wir amüsieren uns zu Tode in German, it's an ongoing discussion how to do it. I hope we will be able to do it before we get even worse election results. But probably we have to distinguish in the reactions to the recent and expected election results during this year and next year. We have to agree on short-term, mid-term, and long-term reactions. I will, so after our meeting, I will write down some of the ideas you gave to us. And for ECPMF, I can assure you that we want to continue the discussion. We see it as an opening, and we will get in touch with you again, and also with our partner organizations in Brussels and all over Europe. Thanks for participating today, and thanks for standing for media freedom and liberal democracy. See you next time.